Hello, Internet. We are back, and this, I must tell you, is a special episode because it's the first one for 2023. It's the 2nd of January today. You people will probably only see it 3 weeks from now, but that's fine. But that's why also, when you have questions for me, you better describe it a bit better than just asking me what happened at minute 56, I don't know, because it's 3 weeks later. It's like writing a book. People ask you, hey, remember that passage? No, I wrote that book 5 years ago and I haven't read it since then. And you know what? I wrote hours in between. Same story. And we're sitting here in Chiang Mai. So that's why, once again, I have a different background. And you might hear the aircon running. We know hotel room. We will be back in Phuket. Our studio will be built. Well, it's being built right now. So it should be done. And then it will be always the same like it used to be in Switzerland. Or Swineland, as I call the place. But enough about me. We have Keith Olivier here. Now, Keith Olivier was a Lance Corporal. I think he's the first Lance Corporal we actually have here. And I like that because I really love speaking to the ranks. They tend to tell the truth a bit different from the officers, especially the senior officers have a different view of matters. He's smiling here at the background. He was a sapper, and I think he's the second sapper we have on here. And you're very welcome, mate. Thank you for contacting me. I want to say to all of you guys, if you have a story, and you all do have a story, please believe me, you have a story. Come and tell us about it before it's too late. Because I do understand, Keith, that you did lose one of your men to death. We sad to hear that, rest in peace, not long ago. And so we cannot get hold of his story now. So welcome, yeah. Can I ask you, how did this start with you? Because I know your granddad was actually fighting on the Boer side in the Second War, the Anglo-Boer War, as they call it, and he ended up in Sri Lanka, or what they called Ceylon in those days.
Yeah,
But over to you.
He was captured. He was captured in Vicksburg. Funny enough, so he was captured in Vicksburg, and from there, he was put into first an initial camp, and then eventually sent out the country to Sri Lanka. And they were actually lucky. This Dia Talawa camp in Sri Lanka now, well, now it is Sri Lanka, of course. It used to be Ceylon. It's in a mountainous area, so it's at higher altitude. It was maybe cold, but they avoided a lot of the tropical disease. So the yellow fever and the malaria that killed a lot of the other people, they were lucky to avoid there. And so, I think quite a few of the people survived that went to that camp, as opposed to some of the lower lying camps in other places. Yes, and then at some point the people from Diatalawa were repatriated to South Africa, and they ended up in Durban. And in Durban, they ended up on the Bluff. The Bluff was basically the big slum, for people who didn't have any means, basically. And so my father grew up on the Bluff in Durban. And, the family, to be honest, was really poor. They lived in essentially a corrugated iron shack. They had this was how my father grew up in the late 1930s and World War II period. So my grandfather, in other words, my father's dad, he was conscripted into the war in Europe. And after the war, he ended up joining the Merchant Marines, and he basically abandoned his wife and the boys in Durban, and he went to Baltimore. And so he spent some time with the Merchant Marines, on the East Coast of the United States, and he also ended up in London. And in London, he produced another offspring over there, who my father only discovered recently. So he discovered that he had essentially what would it be called, a stepsister in the UK. So anyway, that was sort of the background. The family, one way or another, was always involved in the conflict, whether it was the Boer War, the Second World War. You know, and so, you know, my father then, I think when he was about 13, he already started working. He worked for the railway. So the family didn't have enough money to put everybody through high school. So with my father working for the railway and my grandmother working, basically the other sons were able to go to high school, and they then attained a better education level than what my dad had. And they were then also more successful with their careers after the fact. You know, my one uncle ended up working on a Caltex refinery in Cape Town. The other uncle ended up in a family business that made the Keith Palmer fishing reels. I don't know if you know them, the Scarborough reels. You know, the Scarborough reels. So the, you know, the that was kind of a feature of the Natal North Coast. You know, at one time there were people there who used to catch great whites with these big Scarborough reels. You know, until they outlawed that. That was when there was still a whaling station in Durban. And so, since my father worked for the railway, his early years were in Newcastle, and Newcastle actually was where I was born. So Newcastle, of course, is the equivalent of the Pittsburgh area in the United States. It's a big steel making place, and it came prior to Vanderbilt, and then later even they set up a facility in Saldanha, right? So my father worked there, and he became an electrician eventually, a high voltage electrician. And, you know, if you work as a high voltage electrician and you work on electrification, in other words, the conversion of the railway lines from coal and then later diesel to electricity, you know, you never stay in one place very long. You know, the distances you go get larger and larger, and eventually you relocate to get closer to where the work is at, you know. And so we moved around a lot. We first moved to Bethlehem. They were doing a line from the East Coast up them through the mountains, through the Free State. And then later he took a promotion to Johannesburg, but we didn't last long in Johannesburg. It was a kind of a crazy place. You know, I think we were there 3 months, and in 3 months we ran into a trespasser in the middle of the night and wrecked his car and whatever. So we decided, no, this is too hectic a place. And so the family then moved to Vredenburg. So we moved to the West Coast, and he then was working on the Saldanha-Sishen line. So, of course, that's one of the biggest lines in the country. It covers an enormous area, you know. And he probably would have stayed there, except for the fact that he had a boss that was going to give him a heart attack, you know, before he was going to get too old. And so for that, and the fact that his kids were getting to high school age, he decided that there were better opportunities for us in Port Elizabeth. So he then moved, and he took the job in PE. And then, you know, in Port Elizabeth, of course, I ended up going to a technical high school. My brother and sisters went to commercial high school. And from there, my brother and some of my sisters went to college and so on. I elected when I reached the end of high school that I would rather go to the SADF when I was young. You know, I felt when you're young, you're more flexible, you can handle the BS a bit better. And so that was what I elected to do. I wanted to get it. And also I didn't enjoy school very much before I was going to get into something that was going to cost me a lot of money. You know, I needed to have the right motivation, you know. So I decided I was going to go and get the SADF out the way. And initially I was called up to Springs, Marievale, 1 Construction Regiment. Now, I didn't know anything about 1 Construction, but when you get there, you realize that the majority of people who are at 1 Construction Regiment are sort of special people, you know, rather low IQ kind of people, really, you know. It was strange because by the time I arrived, which was early January, the majority of the base was already full. All of the facilities were full. There was really no room for us. Like somebody had made a mistake in planning. So after 2 weeks in Marievale under terrible conditions, we was living in tents that were ankle deep in the mud. You know, it was raining every day. they got about 300 and something of us together, and they sent us down to Bethlehem. When me going to Bethlehem was quite welcome because I had lived in Bethlehem. So this was now going to be my second time in Bethlehem. And in fact, I even had family who lived, an uncle and aunt, and some of their kids lived right in town. And so, of course, they didn't have room for us at the binne basis. So they sent us to one of the beta bases. This was a 26 field at Gerardsdam. And it was quite funny because I think on the day I arrived, somehow my uncle found out, and they drove in through the gate and everything and wanted to see me. Of course, you know, they were shown the way out, you know. But yeah, so anyway, it was good to be back in a familiar place. It was a bit of a strange setup because they didn't have like city water or something, you know. I remember that we hadn't even started basics, and they had to train some people how to do water purification so that we could purify our own water, so that we had water to bath with and drink and whatever. And then our commanding officer was Jaap Kotze. He was a captain, and our primary NCO was Eddie Button, Samayor Button. And Button was a legend, an unbelievable guy, you know. Just Button was one of these guys who typified the good part of the PF, you know. I mean, he was a man's man, you know. I don't remember, I think during our training, which was long, I mean, our training went for a year, you know. But they focused very little on the infantry aspects of it. And so I think over the entire year, we only went to the shooting range about 4 times. But Button would do the shooting demonstration, and to watch that man shoot a rifle was really, you know, he was letting the bullet go before the last doppie had hit the ground, you know. I mean, and he could keep that up all day, you know, unbelievable. And Button was also somebody who had a lot of experience with explosives, and he'd been injured in some sort of explosive blast. And so he had some scars in his face in the wintertime. Then when it was really cold, it would be blue, you know. And yeah, Button was one of those people who really put the fear of God in you, you know. But at the same time, boy, if anybody did something to disrespect his troops, or, you know, I remember we would go to the inside bases for certain drill things and so on, and sometimes they wouldn't prepare any food, and the men would be they'd be fainting by lunchtime because they hadn't eaten anything, you know, and then this guy would get really agitated, you know. So anyway, you know, I think that it was fairly typical for the experience at a beta basis. You know, you had some of the NCOs who would go to town on the weekend, and then they would drink. And then after they had been drinking for a few hours, they would come back, and then they were ready for opfok, as they were called it, you know. And, you know, they actually got themselves in trouble a few times. I remember one time the guys went out and they were drinking, and they treated us on at about, you know, 12:30 on a Sunday night. And they started this big entire company opfok. And then Jaap Kotze showed up at 3 o'clock in the morning to find all of this stuff going on. And he had all of the troops go and wash up and put clean clothing on and sit on the hill. And then he did an opfok with all the NCOs right into the morning, you know. So, yeah, it was, you know, it was definitely tough what we did there. And I think, you know, in general, we were surviving on about 4 hours sleep a night, you know. Really very much sleep deprivation. And of course, our syllabus was extensive with the range of stuff that the infantry or the sappers have to cover. You know, the water provision, you know, ablution facilities, water purification, demolition, bridge building, you know, all of the mine sweeping, explosives, etc. You know, we were sitting getting lectures for long hours. Then, of course, this was in 1986. that I was doing my training, and of course they had all these riots in the Western Cape in '86. So they, just after we started second phase, they packed us all up and took us on a bus to Cape Town to Wingfield. And then from Wingfield, they ended up dividing us out to smaller towns. And my platoon ended up in Worcester, Robertson. We were in Robertson, and we was living in tents at the showgrounds in town. But bear in mind, this is the Western Cape. It's the winter time. It was raining every day. It snowed at night on the mountains there, you know. We were there, I think, for about nearly 3 months. And of course, when we initially arrived, we were just one platoon. And so the police tried to make it appear that they had SADF people everywhere, okay? And so we were driving hundreds of kilometers every day to be seen in every township in the area. It was quite funny. You know, sitting, of course, on these open biffles, getting rained on all day long, you know, it was crazy. And one particular memory I have was being in Sir Lowry's Pass as a stopper group to a police roadblock, and it was literally snowing. I think I had on every piece of clothing that we possessed, but of course they don't issue you with gloves, you know. I mean, our fingers were frozen, you know. I think if somebody had actually tried to run the stopper group, I'm not sure we would have got it right to shoot them, you know. Our fingers would have been so numb, you know. So anyway, after the riot duty was over, we were then sent back to, Gerardsdam, 26th Field, and we restarted second phase. And, you know, I remember that we had only been going for probably 2 weeks when the people from one construction regiment came back. And they were now at the point where, you know, they had trained a lot of people and sent them out, because they don't train those guys very long. They train them how to drive the road graders and the bulldozers and whatever, and then they send them on their way. And so now they were short some people, so they came back to where they'd sent the 300 guys, and they started selecting people to go back to Maribo. Boy, and of course, we did not want to go back there, you know. And as it ended up, some of the youngest guys, like myself, my buddy Dean, we were too young to have a driver's license. And so because of that, they didn't find us to be useful. And so we were amongst approximately the 75 people who were left after they came to take the rest of the guys, you know. And so then with that, with our numbers reduced to such an extent, they dissolved the unit, and they just divided us into the bungalows at 21 Field at the base in town. Wherever there were people short of a full platoon, they put us in. And a bunch of us ended up in Golf Troop. And as it turned out, Golf Troop was the troop that housed the unit rugby team. So it was a bit unfortunate, because they assigned a particularly crazy officer to discipline this rugby team. And so I remember we stood full pack-out inspection every morning for the whole of second phase, the whole rest of the year. We had to run a 2.4 after parade every day, just to, you know, to sort of take the edge off the energy level of these wild guys who were in this bungalow, you know. So it was pretty tough. Anyway, we went through second phase, completed all the stuff that we had to do. And then came, of course, the selection, you know, of where we were going. And, you know, there were some people who wanted to go to Sector 20 because of the, you know, water and boats and things. But a lot of people wanted to go to Sector 10. You know, it's I think that the majority of people did not. So, yeah, so this was, I think it was early December. They, you know, I mean, most of the people volunteered to go to Sector 10. Some people went to 20. And it was at this stage now, you know, as they are dividing the people up and getting them ready to go out, they discovered that they had forgotten to do any section leader training. And they realized that there was a big shortfall of low-ranking NCOs because the people were going to be divided and sent to outside bases and everything, and there was going to be nobody with any rank. And so they selected a bunch of people from those of us to do section leader training, and so I was one of the people sent to section leader. So that was another 2 weke opfok, to get your section leader stripe. And so then, of course, by the time I arrived, we were about the 3rd week in December when I arrived in Oshakati. And of course, the previous people had been there 2 weeks already. They'd already done their retraining and everything. So they skipped the retraining with us. They said, you're not going to get retraining. You just have to go. And within the first week after I showed up, we were sent out on an operation immediately. And I remember that 9 days after I had arrived in Ondangwa, in fact, we arrived in Grootfontein and we drove up with a truck. I don't know why they did that, but 9 days after I arrived, we found ourselves in Naoni in Angola. Naoni was a place that had a mission, like a church and so on. And, there was a lot of action around Naoni over the years. It was always a kind of a hot place. And so 9 days after showing up, we were in Naoni in Angola, and we were supposed to meet a big contingent of our forces and get resupplied because we had no more water. The last water we could get was in Chieda, and so we had used all our water up. And in fact, when we arrived in Naoni, it was in the middle of a thunderstorm. It was raining like crazy, and as you know, the place there, the ground is covered with water very quickly. You can't see anything anymore. You can't recognize where the tracks are. And so we got to Naoni, and the guy in charge of the whole operation, he tried to get comms. I don't know why it was, but 61 Mech didn't seem to have a problem with comms. They had HF comms continuously. Kufut didn't seem to have a problem with comms. But boy, us engineering people with our buffles, the only way they got through was with a long wire thrown up in a tree. And it would take an hour before they would establish connection to somebody. And so, this was always a problem if it was an emergency, And anyway, so they got hold of the base, and then the base told them that there had been people at Naoni the day before, but they had been attacked by MiGs. And so they'd all fled the area, and that we should get out of there too before we, the next guys, So then in the haste now to leave Naoni, the lead vehicle drove down a track that had not been cleared. And everything went fine until the 5th vehicle. And the 5th vehicle was the one behind my vehicle. The driver was sick, and so the medic was driving, and the medic did not understand how to drive exactly in the track of the vehicle in front of it. And so this 5th vehicle was driving about 20 centimeters outside the track, and of course they hit the mine. So we had this mine go off. There were a lot of people injured on that vehicle. The guy who was in charge of that vehicle, he'd been leaning over the driver to tell him to keep in the track, and the blast hit him in the face and it shattered his glasses, so he lost his eye. And on the opposite side of the vehicle, on the right-hand side, was the LNG position. And the guy had an LNG mount with a piece of armor plate, and the blast blew off the armor plate and it hit him in the forehead. So it cut through his skull. And so, he was sort of lying at the bottom of the buffel. Of course, the buffel reared up and threw everybody out. So we had to do rondom verdediging and check for more mines because, often there's not just one. And once again, put the wire antenna in the tree, establish comms, now order Cassavac, then get the recovery on the way to get so the vehicle can be taken back. And then we waited there now. So we had no water left. This is, of course, a few days before Christmas. So you can imagine it's late December, middle of summer. It's very hot. Now, of course, at that time of the year, normally it rains, right? And it had been raining when we came into the place, right? But then it did not rain for the next 3 days. So, you know, you dehydrate quite fast there, and you know, we all jointly lost about 15 kilos over the next 3 days in dehydration. Everybody's eyes were sunken in. You know, some people were if they would try to pee, they would be peeing pure blood, just sign that your kidneys are failing. And so eventually we decided, you know, if we keep waiting for this recovery, we're going to die in this place, you know. And so we ended up doing a self-recovery. We had to pull the vehicle back up on its side, on its wheels, lift the front up, strap it to the back of another buffel, or going around the roll bar with a winch cable. And then we started moving south, you know. And in fact, the officer, he started bundu bashing south, and our vehicle was actually the one in the lead. And he kept that up until he hit a tree that had been knocked down the opposite way. So the tree was pointing towards us, went right through the grill. I mean, you know how heavy those grills are on the front of the buffel, right? So anyway, it was considering that this is our first operation, you know, this is our introduction, you know, to being on the border. It was a pretty rough operation. By the time we got back to Namibia, there was only one vehicle that could drive independently. Every other vehicle was towing another vehicle. The Tiffies had worked for a long time to fix everything. Yeah, of course, we had the people who had been Cassavacked. Some of them only came back months later. You know, nobody died, which was amazing, you know. So yeah, that was our first introduction. This was the thing. This was sort of the primary thing that the people at 25 Field at that time were doing. So what they would do is the majority of the SADF contingent was supporting UNITA, which was further north than Naoni. And so what they would do is they would follow these bundu-bash tracks north and south and just try to remove whatever mines they could. We went all the way up to Naoni, and we didn't find a single landmine. And then, of course, we found the landmine with a vehicle, right? So pretty disappointing if you think about it, you know? So I went on another one of those a couple of weeks later, similar type of deal, meeting up with Kufut in Angola and so on. But, you know, I didn't really like what we were doing. I thought it was very reckless. You know, we didn't have any like fighting vehicles with us. There were no rifles. There was nothing with anything heavier than a 7.62 by 51, you know. And I thought that the people were totally misjudging the situations they could get themselves into that far into Angola. I mean, we were passing on Jiva, you know, in order to get there, you know. And I mean, that was, I think, our unit had a fatality rate in 87 of more than 10%. So it wasn't just conjecture that what they were doing was very dangerous and risky. It was a fact, you know, and it just didn't seem very organized or structured. We should have had better protection with us for what we were doing, the kind of ranges and everything we were at. So then the opportunity came to go to some of the outside bases and do what would be considered routine Sapper work. And when the position came up for Elundu, I took that one. Because Elundu, we knew, was a very small base. It was located directly on the infiltration route for SWAPO. The base was regularly attacked by SWAPO. So we thought that, you know, Elundu was actually the place that really needed somebody who was going to do the job properly, you know. And so we volunteered then to go to Elundu. And I remember the commanding officer of 25 Field saying we were going to have to duck every night when the SWAPO was going to lob their mortars, you know. And it was sort of a bit of a joke, you know. The impression you had was that SWAPO was not a very competent fighting force, you know, and they could never hit anything they aimed at or whatever. Of course, we found out that that was not the case at Elundu, you know. So anyway, we went to Elundu, we relieved the team that was there, and we then automatically, of course, took over the sweeping duties. And one of the big things is that the way the military trains people always involves running. But the job that you have to do as a sapper involves walking, and the muscles between walking and running are not the same. So it took us probably a month at least to get fit, walking at 7 kilometers an hour. And I did a little calculation before we had our call. We did 4,000 kilometers in 210 days. So it averages out to 19 kilometers a day. Now, of course, you didn't sweep every day, but it was nearly every day. And of course, it varied, it would be 12 kilometers, for example, from Elundu to where the water hole was, where you would collect water. So that was 12 kilometers. If you went to Inanna halfway mark, it was 14 kilometers. If the team from Inanna came the other halfway, And twice a week, we did a logistical convoy for food and mail that went to Inanna, and we would sweep halfway. The team from Inanna would sweep halfway. So it was 14 kilometers, not such a big deal. 2 hours, basically, till you were at the middle point. And then every 2 weeks, you did the convoy to Congo, and that was 42 kilometers to the halfway mark. And you did that 2 days in a row. So in 2 days, you did, 84 kilometers. So, there was really my understanding was that in prior years, they used to have either 2 sections of sappers or they had a platoon of sappers at Elundu. But in 87, it was decided that sappers were needed elsewhere. And so the base only got a section. And so our section had to do everything. And it was brutal. I mean, we had almost, most nights you would go to sleep from exhaustion, honestly. That was how it was. And other aspects of the life there, we never had breakfast. It was always brunch and supper. And of course, our base at the end of the day was the furthest base from a logistical point of view. We were the last line to get food on trucks. Congo had a landing strip, and they would bring material with the Dakota. But for example, we were the last people to get bread. By the time the bread got to Elundu, it was inedible. So there was actually a point in time where we were actually hungry, literally hungry, at Elundu, and then at some point we were given an order to destroy a lot of rat packs. So of course, before we destroyed, by blowing them up, we first went through and removed all the items that were dry and would last, and you made sure that you got rid of the cheeses, because the cheese was one of the first things that went bad. And then, of course, if you had pickled fish, you just threw that away. But all the energy bars and the breakfast stuff and the coffee and the sugar, So after that, I would say we were not hungry anymore. But that's what it took. It took having to destroy ration packs, in order for us to actually get enough. Because they would basically, because we would have only 2 meals, they would give a rack pack to 2 people to share. But it wasn't a rack pack is not designed to share. You can't effectively divide it between 2 people, So that was, we basically, we did all of the routine stuff, clearing. Of course, it was a strange situation from a command point of view. When we left the base and we were going somewhere, I was in charge. It was my convoy. My vehicle was the first vehicle in line, As soon as we reached the halfway mark or whatever our destination was, then the command reverted back to the infantry group. So they were in command, going back wherever if you were not sweeping. And this was something that, of course, we had the Cape Corps guys. They were the infantry group who was in charge of the base. And, they didn't want to concede any kind of control over operations. But, the way I guess as the sectional, the operational procedures were written, that is how it was. Even though I was a one-liner, when we left the base, I was in charge. They didn't have anything to say except to do their job, you know. And this was one of the problems actually that I ran into, was getting those guys to do their job, you know. You know, we had a particular problem at Elundu that the infantry contingent was always drunk at night. And we found out it was actually a cause of a lot of security issues, because they could not get enough alcohol through the military supply chain for their demand. In other words, the 5-4 battalion would only, they would base the amount of beer and other alcohol based on the number of people at the base. And that's all you could get. You couldn't get any more. So there was a trade going on between the people at the base and the local people to get the balance of what they wanted. And the people who did the trading, who came into the base, were the SWAPO informants, basically. And this is what would happen every day when we were out clearing the road. They would be trading for booze, okay, with SWAPO. And as a result of that, when they then attacked the base in March, I mean, the accuracy of the fire in that attack was just brutal. So, in fact, the first mortar that fell that night landed directly next to the chef. And it took his entire, blew the bottom part of his leg off. And he crawled from where he was hit into the sick bay. Another mortar landed directly on the roof of the chaplain's room. And everything that was inside the chaplain's room was completely shredded. Now, the chaplain had, at that time, he had been with the doctor and the medic. Now, I don't remember the doctor's name, but the medic was a guy by the name of Dean Blacklaws. And the guy who was the chaplain, his name is Kobus de Kok. He now is a pastor in Langebaan. He actually wrote about this event, and he said that the food that night had been so inedible that the three of them had got together in the sick bay and were making some food from some ration packs, because they just couldn't eat the food that had been made. And because of that, the chaplain survived. If he had been inside his room, he would have been killed for sure, you know? And so consequently, when the wounded started arriving at the sick bay that night, it was the chaplain, the medic, and the doctor. Those were the three people who were in attendance. I sent you some pictures of my tent and my troops' tent. It's just amazing, the coincidence that there was a branch above my troops' tent, and a pencil strim rifle grenade hit that branch exactly and did an airburst. And as a result of that airburst, several of the people in my section were hit, myself included. Stephen Nickelbein, he had the worst shrapnel in his leg. And then, of course, my tent, they put a 62 millimeter mortar directly next to my tent. And I had done my laundry that day, and all my laundry was lying on top of my desk. And that was within 1 meter of the impact site. And so all my clothes were basically shredded. Well, the next day, after this whole thing transpired, we took a convoy with about 180 wounded to Inanna. And from Inanna, they put them on the Dakota and took them to Ondangwa for treatment. But when we swept through to Inanna the following day, I mean, my clothes were just hanging off of me. They issued me all new clothes, you know, down to socks and underwear. I mean, I didn't have a single thing that was not perforated. So, yeah, the accuracy of the SWAPO people and the information that they had available about where, who was, and so on, it was really unbelievable. And I remember that the day after the attack, I mean, we had multiple helicopters arrive with military brass who had to walk around, because I mean, realistically, there was probably close to 200 people who needed medical attention, after this one attack. Now, I found a SADF document that records that, and they stated that we had 2 losses. But of course, those are the people who died. The guy up in the Apkas, he either fell out the Apkas or he was shot out the Apkas, but he was dead. And I'm not sure exactly who the other person was who didn't make it, but we had supposedly 2 casualties. But yes, I think the number of wounded was, of course, many times higher. And that one attack had a very lasting effect on the base, because the Cape Corps guys, they were not national servicemen, right? They were volunteers. And a lot of them started applying for transfers immediately, and they got their transfers. And so by the time we abandoned the base, which was in September, the strength at the base was down to 50 people. And, the intelligence reports at that time were having groups of the so-called Typhoon, insurgents moving around in groups of 30 to 50, So, and these were people who were not afraid, who were very well trained, bumping, you going out to clear the road, you've got 8 sappers, and you've maybe got 20 people doing protection, First of all, you're walking in the middle of the road, your protection's walking on the side of the road, you're in a very exposed position out there. And I mean, if you consider, when you go to in Congo, I mean, you're moving in one direction, 42 kilometers away from what is already a very tiny outpost, into the middle of no man's land. You have no radio communication. A VHF is completely dead, So we had a ambush on a convoy going to Nkongo. And what happened with that ambush is that SWAPO set up the ambush area, and they allowed the sweeping team actually to walk through the ambush, and then they hit the vehicles behind the sweeping team. And then we had a second ambush, which was a funny thing. It involved a big group of people who went on leave, again from the Cape Corps. I don't know how many, maybe 2 platoons or something, 60 people went on leave. And so what they did is they left all of their sort of primary ammunition and magazines and everything at the base, and they took just their rifle with 1 magazine to Inani. And then when they came back, they picked up their rifle and their 1 magazine, and it was on that trip, leaving Inani in the evening and driving back to Elundu, that convoy was ambushed. And of course, when human nature, these guys had shot out their 1 magazine probably within 15 seconds. And then after that, there was no fire coming from these vehicles anymore, 6, 7 vehicles in a convoy, nobody shooting, And so the SWAPO guys ran out into the road shooting up at the vehicles. And it was in that ambush incident that Dean Blacklaws, the medic, he actually got a piece of bullet splatter from one of the bullets hitting the armor plate. It actually hit him in the temple. And he didn't realize, but he thought he had a little scratch on his skin, but actually it had gone all the way into his brain, And so after he left the SADF, he ended up having a lot of hassle with that fragment, So, Dean Blacklaws is another one of the guys who doesn't like to talk about his experiences there, I mean, I personally was extremely impressed with all of the medical people and their ability to emotionally detach and be cool under these crazy circumstances, that we got ourselves into. Of course, I picked up some shrapnel from this rifle grenade in the first attack, and I waited until the bulk of the wounded had been treated in the sick bay before I went to get my tetanus shot. And I remember walking into this Armco bunker, and two people had bled out on the floor. There was just blood everywhere, and I remember slipping in the blood and nearly falling on the ground. And then going in there and getting my tetanus shot. And, you looked at the faces of these guys. I mean, their faces were so covered in blood, the doctor, the medic, all you could see was the white of their eyes. So, it would be great to actually, hear from people who've been in those situations. But unfortunately, I don't have contact with them. And Dean Blacklaws was there, but he doesn't seem to want to talk about it. So anyway, that was the thing. Once the decision, I think it was probably Commandant Himan from 5-4 Battalion. He was overall responsible for 5-4 Battalion, which included our area. He was in charge of everything that happened at Inanna. And I think that he decided that, that the base and the manpower there was becoming too weak, and there was a risk that base could be overrun, And they then decided to close that base down. And it also coincided with the time when the MOVs were introduced to do the road clearing. So when I originally went to Elundu, there was initially a full corporal with me, Corporal Tennyson. And Tennyson was then recalled to go back to the States to work on the MOV program. And he came back then with the first group of people who were running the MOVs, and they then took over basically that logistical operation. And then at that point, they didn't need us foot sappers in Elundu, and Elundu just became a liability, that the base could get wiped out overnight or something, And so we ended up getting moved back to Inanna, and it was right before we had demolished the base. We had demolished all of the bunkers. We had demolished all the buildings. There was only one building that had the wall standing. That was the shower facility, and it was just so people could actually still shower, And that was when they attacked the base the second time. And now, of course, the second time the base was attacked, there were far fewer people there. I think there was maybe a total of 75 people at the base that night, whereas the first time around it had maybe been 350, a lot of people in an area 100 meters by 100 meters. But the second time, they put a lot more firepower into the base, 42 mortars and rifle grenades. And we actually, together with Kufut, we discovered a cache of white phosphor mortars not far from Elundu. There was over 40 white phosphor mortars in there. And, I sort of shudder to think at what the consequences would have been if we had not found that cache, because it's pretty much impossible to escape white phosphor, So anyway, we closed the chapter on Elundu at that point. We were moved back to Inanna. And then when the last 3 months approximately that we were in Inanna, we mainly did projects sort of within the base itself. And we then also went and supported Kufut on a number of occasions. So they would have information that there was an arms cache at a certain place, but they didn't know exactly the place. The person just knew it was there. And so they would take some of our sappers along, But it's always a bit risky going out with Kufut, because Kufut gets wind of something else going on, and then they just drag you along on whatever adventure that happens to be, So we ended up going and attacking some Swapo base that was not far from Onjiva. And we were lucky because it had rained very heavily immediately preceding the attack. And so the people had been flooded out of their tunnels and whatever they had there. And so when we arrived, there was basically nobody there, So but that was sort of more or less how it went. I remember that when it came time to go back to South Africa to claw out, for whatever reason, they didn't seem to have capacity with the Flossie to do that. And so they ended up busing us back, which was not a very comfortable thing, a very, very long road trip, you know. And then to make matters worse, our bus hit a cow within the first 50 kilometers, and it was a wreck. And so they then took everybody off our bus and then spread us through all these other buses. So, you know, and some people ended up standing basically the whole way, you know. But that I think that they were reluctant to do the other thing, which is take you to Grootfontein and then you get on a train, you know. I figured they had previous incidents where they had put people on trains and the people had wrecked the trains, you know, and got a hold of a lot of alcohol, got drunk, and then just started breaking things, you know. So that's why they elected to do the thing with the buses. They then took us back to you know, 2 fields, the base in town, but there was a lot of agitation with sort of you know, the new training officers and the Omana. And you know, these lieutenants and whatever were forever screaming at us and whatever. I remember some guy stuck his head in the window and screamed at a bunch of people in his bungalow, and they just grabbed a hold of him and just threw him fully clothed in the shower, you know, said fuck off, you know. So yeah, so after a few incidents, I think to avoid it escalating, they took all the people who were clawing out and they moved all of us out to 26 field. And they said, okay, here's the deal. You know, we're going to give you guys briarwood and meat and pop, you know, soda. And you need to take care of yourselves. You can braai all day and take it easy. And we'll make sure everybody gets all their stuff sorted out, returns everything, does all your paperwork. And then everybody sort of, and I think they also brought our training officer, so Jaap Kotze, they brought him back, you know. And I think that with that all, everybody sort of calmed down, and because there were a lot of angry people, you know, after 30-something hour bus ride, and then they were trying to get us to stand guard duty at the binnenbasis and what have you. So yeah, so we ended up clearing out, and you know, the only other noteworthy thing was that I remember that they didn't issue us malaria tablets. You know, so you were having to take a malaria tablet every day. And it was that time of the year also. I mean, it was summertime when we were sent back. It was the peak of the malaria season. And I remember that so many people died from malaria that they actually put on TV, you know, that you need to go to your pharmacist and you need to get this stuff and take it, you know. And I mean, I knew people personally who nearly died from malaria. So just remarkable how you can go through what wasn't at that time such a low intensity war and survive everything, and then you get back home and you die from malaria because you're trying to get a tan, you know? Because that was the reason the people who were not taking the malaria tablets was because it bleaches your skin and you aren't able to get a tan. And here we are in the middle of the summer holidays. Everybody wants to be hip and whatever, you know, and have a tan. And you couldn't, you know, just as a matter of survival. So I think that's about it, Koos. I think that at least the people in my section, it was a very lonely and dangerous place to be. But I think that, you know, we felt that we did something that was really useful there. The people around us needed us, both for the water provision and for clearing the roads. And then, of course, you know, explosive ordnance disposal. You know, I mean, we were always having to pick up all these unexploded mortars and stuff that were falling on the base. Yeah, and of course, we were, generally speaking, the only people who were sober at that time. So we also carried all of the wounded, picked them up and carried them into the sick bay. In some cases, the second time around, what was a bit strange, when the second attack, it was the only time in my memory that my engineering lieutenant officer had come over from Inanna and brought the new engineering officer who was taking over from him. And So he never came to Elundu to begin with, and this was the only time that I was aware of that he came. And on that night, they have to rev the bass, you know. So he and we were actually sitting in what was now the sick bay, because the bunker was gone, right? The Armco bunker was gone, so it was just a tent, a single square tent, and there was a steel closet with all of the medical supplies in. And about the second mortar that fell right behind that closet, blew up all the medical supplies, And so there was no painkiller or anything for all the people who had to be stitched and so on. And so one of the things that the sappers had to do was hold the people down so that the guy could sew,
I must say, Keith, I love listening to stories like yours because it gives us a totally different view of what actually happened. And I want to thank you for that. And I know that it's bringing up a lot of memories for a lot of people, so I want to thank you for that as well. And can I ask you, how old were you when this was taking place?
Well, so first of all, I was young for somebody who was at school. So when I left school, I was 17. So when I started my training, I was 17. And when I was at Elundu, I was 18. And there were three of us who were within, our birthdays were within 3 weeks. And we were all 18, Q1 was one of them. Q1 and Dean, in fact, had their birthday on the same day in June, I think it is. And then mine was on the 17th of May. So, yeah, we had some young people there. And then at the same time, one of my troops was from the Malmesbury area. To think of his name now, just can't get it in my mind. But he was 21. So there was quite a big span of age there. I had another troop, Nagel was his name. He was from some farming area in the middle of nowhere. He was also an older guy, But no, everybody did their job really well. I had one troop who was a bit of a naughty bugger. He's one of these people who sort of I don't know. He sort of had this idea that there was always a way to make a buck. And he thought he was going to make himself a pile of money. And so what he was actually doing is he was buying his own alcohol supplies and then selling them on the black market to the other guys, But the fatal mistake he made was that he started giving them credit. And they started buying his booze on credit. And then eventually, when they ran up the account a certain amount, they just told him, no, if you, we're not going to pay you, And so his big profit turned into a big loss. And then he wanted to complain and have somebody help him. I said, listen, man, you broke the law in the first place doing what you're doing. Nobody's going to help you get your money back, So, yeah. Now, that was a guy who came from Tromsburg, a very, very tiny little town, there in the Karoo. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's the Wagner principle in US law. And in English, we call it unclean hands. You can't come to the courts if you both are doing something illegal. Like there was one guy actually was selling dacha, weed. And then he got screwed, and so he came to court and they locked him up. So you can't go to the court if you have dirty hands. It's a very interesting legal.
I mean, you got to be kidding, I mean, you think anybody's what? Commandant Himan's going to help you put the squeeze on to pay you for your illegal booze? Good God, man! You're going to get yourself some DB if you open your mouth, So yeah, I don't know. No, but that was. Everything seemed to revolve around alcohol, and just given where we were, what the circumstances were, I mean, the majority of us did not even touch this stuff, not even drink a beer, I mean, I remember that I slept outside in the open I forget what they called it. We were under constant threat of attack. And so they wanted you to sleep against the wall, basically, every night. So, I mean, we slept outside through the whole winter with that tropical sleeping bag that they issue you in the army. I mean, we just about froze to death there. So, no, to me, it was just, and of course, we saw the results of what happened if you were drunk and the crisis came. I mean, that is why they had so many casualties. I mean, we took multiple hits within just meters of our position, and nobody was killed. Okay, some people got a bit of shrapnel, but you were lying there on the ground, and you watched people running, and they would run until some bomb fell, and then they would be down, and then they would get up and they would run again, and then another bomb would fall, and they would be down, And I mean, you can't do that, Now in the second attack, I should maybe make another point. In the first attack, of course, we had 2 mortar systems on the base to shoot back, right? The guys fired the mortars with all of the charges on them. So how far that mortar goes, right? I mean, you're talking kilometers, right? And the guys were only, 150 meters away. So then in the second time we were attacked, they made sure they didn't make that mistake. So they fired all the mortars with 0 charges. And then some of the mortars fell inside the base. Some of the guys were wounded by our own mortars. I mean, when you have, what's the big one? The 81 millimeter mortars falling inside your own base. Woo, that's pretty scary, And we already had 42 mortars from the enemy to deal with, So, now I'm afraid, the chaplain, who you can rely on to give you a relatively level-headed opinion, he was not so impressed with the command element at the base, if you know what I mean. So, it was really tough. It's the people simply, I think that if they had been sober to begin with, maybe there was a chance that they could get their stuff together. But then when they drunk, it was terrible. There was a particular guy. He was a staff sergeant, and he was responsible for what is the word that they used? When you proofread somebody else's mail, what do they call that? Censoring. I think that's what it's called, right? But he was responsible for my mail, and he took a dislike to me, and as a consequence, my parents never received any email or any mail from me, and I never received any mail from them until after the second attack, in which he was one of the casualties. And after that, magically, my mail returned again, But, I don't know. Sometimes you think that some of these guys had the karma stacked up against them, because of the things that they were doing, That you have somebody who is such a far-flung outpost, has basically no contact with the outside world. And of course, that was the other joke, So, basically from the time I arrived at the base until I went on our first leave, which I think was in about June, I never received any mail, okay? So I said, okay, this is bullshit, So my father was a radio amateur. So I went home on leave. I was home for about a week. And I swatted up on all the amateur radio stuff and how to make antennas and everything. And when I came back, I drew myself a B25 out of the store, which I think it's a 10-watt transmitter, 10 or 20 watts, I'm not sure. And I made myself a inverted V antenna. And after that, I spoke to my dad every weekend via ham radio, And it was very funny because there was a major who was in the communications part of the military. And he figured out what was happening. This was a guy, Ken Victor. He was in Port Elizabeth, in fact. And so he had their direction finding equipment to determine where I was at and everything. And he contacted Commandant Himan in Inanna and said, you need to go and arrest this guy who's a pirate, blah, 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 you know. And Himan just squashed the whole thing, you know. Because I was there when Himan came and did his inspection. And, he would see that had the radio there on the sandbag wall, and he looked at the coax going outside and then saw the antenna in the tree, but he didn't say a word. There was somebody within the communications group trying to get me arrested, But that's the thing, you see, if you are creative, it's very hard to keep a guy down,
No, you're quite right. I remember I have a friend, he's late now, he was a colonel actually in the signal. And he used to complain all the time about what the troops were doing to his radios. And I think we became almost enemies. I said to him, the radios we had sometimes didn't work. And so we would use it, as a platform to put the Casper's jack on when you change wheels. Then we would bend it like a banana. Might I say, the colonel, may you rest in peace, went ape. You know what I want to say? He went totally bananas. He was not impressed with us doing that to his radios. But it was difficult. How big was this base? I think there's a lot of people who wouldn't know the name. So how big was it in oppervlakte in size?
It was basically 100 meters by 100 meters. You can actually, if you know where it is, you can still find it on Google Earth. But if you don't know where it is, you won't find it anymore, because even as slow as those thorn trees grow, it's been what now, 30 years. So the walls, of course, have washed down, that were pushed up. But it used to be, if you go back historically, it used to be much more distinct. But there is a video of I'm trying to think of the guy's name now. One of these 3-2 battalion guys. He went there in I think it was 2008 or could be 2012, and they actually drove into the base. And obviously they had some very bad experiences in that area. They had a lot of men killed, just north of Elundu, because that was the infiltration route, And, you could clearly see that those guys were very emotional, back at that base. Yeah, I can't think of the name of the guy now, who he was. But he has a video on, he's written some books on 3-2 battalion. The Buffel Strakel, things like that.
Yeah, that's good, Botma.
Botma, yes. So this was a Botma expedition that they went through that whole area, but they made a stop at Elundu, and they have photographs and video. Of course, they were not there when the base was demolished. So they didn't necessarily understand how it got into the condition that it got into. But we were the ones who were there, who had to jackhammer all those walls down and that type of thing,
Yeah, I have to say to all of you that I think Fosse, our presenter, the flight navigator, or flight engineer, he will be doing an interview with Dr. Louis Botma soon. I know they're setting it up, and I will ask Dr. Botma if he can give us those pictures and put it in here. But if I can't get it done, don't get angry with me. You know how life is.
No problem. Yeah.
But I can imagine it must have been. I don't like Pretoria, to be honest, because I was there in the flying squad for 4 years, and whatever crime happened there, from shooting a straight-on plane to whatever, you name it, we were there first, always. And so every time I drive around in Pretoria, I get anxious. I see these crime scenes and I just place off in my mind again. So I try to avoid Pretoria, even though it's not Pretoria's fault, of course not. So I must wonder how you guys are feeling, when you look back. Do you sometimes dream you back there, or do you have anxiety moments, anything like that? Did it affect your marriages? Because certainly got divorced the first time because of what happened?
I did not get married young. I think I was 26 when I got married, so that was already 8 years later. I mean, I would say that the crime in South Africa affected me more than the situation in Namibia. You know, I think that me as a person, you know, I had to learn a lot of respect for the SWAPO combatants at that time. You know, when you considered what was being used against them, you know, if you had ever deployed with Kufut and seen the way in which they operate, you know, with 10, 15 vehicles, with each vehicle has a double LMG mounted on the front, in some cases 20mm cannons. Then, of course, you have all of the regular small arms with the people on the vehicles, you know, and they fight back like hell, you know. So, you know, the big thing I think in my case was that I had a job to do there. I couldn't really change the risks that were associated with doing that job. The only things that I could do was that if I did something that was particularly dangerous, you know, you could try to do things in such a way that you would be more likely to die than to be maimed, because being maimed was something you were afraid of. You know, I did not want to end up there at Sapper's Hook in Port Elizabeth with the other people who were basically had to be cared for 24/7, you know. You know, I remember one of the jobs that I had was after that first attack that we had, I put out 12 claymores every night, and I took them back in every morning. And I did that job. I didn't give that job to one of my troops to do. I did that job myself. I was carrying basically 12 claymores plus the appropriate amount of detonation cord and all of those primers and everything. And I mean, if anything had happened, you know, I would never have known that it had happened, you know. But yeah, that was really and the anti-personnel mines. Those were pretty significant concern, because they're not really designed to kill you. They're designed to hurt you bad. That's all, you know. And I mean, we were fortunate that our enemy was not so sophisticated. You know, that is the difference, I think, when you deal with the people in the Middle East or Afghanistan. These are theoretically very old civilizations. You know, these people know how to do science and math, and they are not intimidated by that level of technology. Whereas the SWAPO guys, they were terrified of touching a detonator or whatever. And very commonly, they would carry the anti-tank mines with a detonator installed. Because, you know what I mean? Because they were too afraid to touch it. And I mean, they laid for us, of course, they laid a boosted cheese mine for us. This was within the first 2 months that I was there. So these people, that's something that I figured out very early, that you were constantly being observed. And the way in which you approached your job would determine the next thing they would do. And so they laid this one boosted cheese mine for us. It was within 50 meters of arriving at the waterhole, you know, and they had buried it in this clay road, and they had dragged some branches over the road, you know, and that mine was not detectable with the equipment that we had. The only metal was the firing pin, and in order to detect the firing pin, you had to hold it stationary directly over it, which you're not doing. You're walking at 7 kilometers an hour, you know. And so actually, the guys actually walked over the top of the mine. And one of the guys had seen something, but it had not registered in his mind. And he got another 20 meters down the road, and then he turned around and he came back. And by that point, of course, my vehicle was probably about 60 meters away, you know. And then they, you know, a group of them came back and they looked at something on the ground, and one guy kicked at it with his foot, and they actually broke the Bakelite detonator cap off the top of the detonator, and it went flying. Then, as soon as the detonator cap came off, they immediately knew what it was, you know. And at that time, Corporal Tennyson was still with us, and he lifted the mine, you know. And it wasn't booby-trapped, as it turned out. And after that, they never bothered laying another mine for us again. You know, I was there the rest of the year. There was no mine laid within our area of influence. But then you take the guys from Nkongo, for example. Now, the guys in Nkongo, they only had to sweep the road, the 42 kilometers, twice a month. That's all they had to do. There was no other sweeping involved because they had a landing strip and everything. They had a Kufut base right next to them. Those guys who had to sweep so little, they were too lazy to sweep. And so they would be spooking that road. You know, SWAPO was laying TM57 metal cased mines in that road for them. They were so confident that they were not going to be sweeping. And actually the only reason why they didn't have worse losses is because Kufut would always hit the damn mine with their Casper. You know? So Kufut was forever hitting mines on the little section of road from the halfway mark where we were out towards Nkongo. And then, of course, somebody had to run 4 miles to go and get help, you know? So, yeah, that does, you know, we did our job well, you know, based on the poor quality protection that we got. You know, I remember that I got some equipment from our own stores to help us protect ourselves. I drew from the store a Patmore. We learned to shoot the Patmore off the back of the buffel. We got our own LMG. You know, I remember when we got attacked the first time, the LMG that was facing the enemy malfunctioned. You know, can you imagine? Of course, the guy who was in there with the LMG, he only had 1 magazine for his R4, you know, so 35 bullets and then you're done, you know. So our own LMG got dragged over to the bunker on the corner to shoot back at the enemy, you know. I mean, but we did. And then what we would do, what we found was a helpful thing is whenever we practiced anything, if we practiced shooting our rifle grenades, if we practiced shooting the Patmore, we would go near to where one of the local peer kraals are, and we would start doing our practice. They would all come out to have a look. And then we would tell the peer, hey, pick a target for us. What do you want us to hit? Oh, that tree over there. Boom, bang, you know? And then the PBS quickly recognized, you know, you had to watch out for the sappers. They knew what they were doing. They had stuff and they were going to probably use it. And I think that that's the only reason why we were not shot down in the ambush. You know, they waited for us to walk through the kill zone and then they shot up the convoy behind us. So, but you know, you had to do whatever you could do to survive because the odds, unfortunately, were not so good there, you know. So when you look at the guys from 25 Field who were doing the mine hunts, you know, one of their group walked into a Fapla ambush. The Fapla people observed which way they were going, where they set up their TB. They set up their ambush zone just down of where the Tierbeer was. They came out the Tierbeer the next morning. They resumed sweeping. They walked straight into the ambush, you know. Those guys were hit with mortars and all sorts of things. Mortar fell right in the middle of the sweeping team. You know, there was another situation where the guys, there was some sort of pipe or something in the road, and they planted a boosted mine really close to it. And so they couldn't tell apart the signal from the pipe that was in the road or the mine. And so these guys drove over the boosted mine. It blew the engine out of the buffel, and the engine actually fell on somebody who was walking protection. You know, just an unbelievable way to die. But, you know, I mean, the guys who went to Angola, and I'm not talking about as part of some bigger operation. I'm talking about when they were doing their own thing under our own leadership. You know, I just thought that was really reckless what was going on, you know. And I don't know if it changed at the end because a lot of people ended up being boots on the ground, supporting UNITA, you know, where they were obviously part of a bigger, usually 6-1 mech, and all those other people were involved in that, you know. Yeah, I mean, there were people who I met at Elundu. You know, in some cases they were, you know, civil force people, campers. You know, they got involved in these operations in Angola. They ended up getting killed by cluster bombing. You know, so that same place that I had been, Nahoni, there was a cluster bombing incident that happened right at Nahoni, killed some guys. You know. So now I think I wasn't under any illusions, you know, as to our invincibility. I thought we were very vulnerable. I remember that when I told you about the landmine incident there right in the beginning, you know, at my 9th day. I mean, on our 7th day, we were spotted by a Soviet helicopter. You know, it could have been all over right there, you know, but for whatever reason, they chose not to engage. And so we got away with it. You know, I mean, what were we going to do? You're going to shoot down a big Russian helicopter with the RPG-7? I mean, it's not going to happen, you know? So we were very weak in terms of the, you know, anti-air stuff. We really had nothing of any consequence. So I think we were very lucky. When you look at what's happening now in Ukraine, of course, the weapons have become more advanced and everything, you know. There it seems to be maybe a bit more balanced that, you know, you can't just get away with anything anymore in the air, you know, but we didn't have that capability.
May I ask you, on a professional curiosity, how do you shoot a packmore from a buffle? What exactly is the procedure?
You can actually shoot it from where you are seated. So you just put the base on the seat between your legs. Just make sure you don't get any parts sort of sandwiched in there, you know. And then another thing you can do is you can shoot it from the buck at the back. You know, if you shoot it from the buck at the back, you don't have to worry about the position of the roll bar. But anyway, you should be shooting outwards anyway, right? So, yeah, well, we practiced under all circumstances, shooting it from the and of course we used rifle grenades a lot. So I remember that when we first arrived, we had a different impression about what kind of protection and everything was about. And initially, you know, we would just carry our rifle with one magazine. And after we saw a few incidents there, then that changed. We were carrying now our full pack-out ammunition, the whole full chest webbing, and virtually everybody had a rifle grenade on the barrel and a ballistic round in the chamber. And we had practiced with those things. We knew exactly how to shoot them, you know, because you needed whatever force multiplication you could get if you were going to be in a firefight when you're standing in the road. You know, I mean, it's a very bad position to be in. If you look at the photograph I sent you, which is of Dean Collett's sweeping team, and Dean is the leading guy, and you actually look at the way some of the guys, so some people would carry the rifle, you know, crossways across their body. But if you look at Dean Collett and one of the other guys, they have it only over one shoulder. And of course, you're carrying the mine detector, which probably weighs, I don't know what that thing was, 12 kilograms or something, you know, you have that in your hand, and then you have to change hands because your arm is killing you in no time, you know.
I often wondered about you guys when you're walking there sweeping. Are you listening for sound or something? How does that system work? The handheld detector.
Yeah, it basically makes a high-pitched noise, and the loudness of the noise is proportional to the size of the object and the depth, of course, you know. So a real mine, like a cheese mine, it makes a very faint sound if you hold the detector right on it, you know. Now, a metal-cased mine, a TM57, I mean, that thing is going to blow your eardrums from 3 meters away. You know, nobody has any excuse, you know, to miss a metal-cased mine, you know. But in general, you know, the enemy was only going to lay metal mines if they strongly suspected that you were not going to be sweeping, because you were guaranteed going to find it. But the boosted cheese mines, they were very, very difficult to detect.
But let us say
And
you do detect a mine, but
sorry.
let us say you do detect a mine. What's the procedure? Because, you know, there's a lot of people here, Keith, who knows nothing. They don't have no clue what you're talking about now. I even made a note, we should explain what you meant with an opcast. I get letters from young people and foreigners, and they say to me, we don't understand the terminology. You people better explain better. So let us start with, once this mine detector of yours has picked up a mine, what happens?
Well, look, the fact is of course, 99.99% of what you detect is, of course, not a mine, right? But you don't know that at the time. Most of what is in the road is, shell casings, lids from tin cans, and all the kind of trash that people throw out onto the road, you know. And so, of course, they taught you, you know, when you were a two-field. Just give me 1 second here. I just want to close the door. I've got a dog that's complaining. Yeah, so you're supposed to investigate the item, you know, with something. Now, of course, by the time we had R4s, there was no more issuance of bayonets, right? And so the thing you would normally expect to use, like a bayonet, wasn't available because the weapon was never designed. The Israelis had a bayonet, but the South African version deleted that feature, right? So first of all, we didn't have, I mean, if you had something, it was a pocket knife that you were carrying yourself, right? And honestly, with time and the amount of time pressure that we were under to get the job done, and the nature of that clay road, when that clay road bakes hard in the sun, and then when the vehicles drive over it, it basically like fractures it and turns it into a powder. And so what we used to do is you would actually kick at the object with your toe, but in a very flat trajectory, not downwards. Now, if it was an anti-personnel mine, you were going to be a goner, okay? I mean, it was going to take your foot off. But we learned that Sapper was not really into doing the anti-personnel mines. You know, the Black Widow was set off, I think, with 30 grams, right? And so, you know, I mean, it would be very easy for the Sapper guy to set it off just by sprinkling some sand on it, you know? So as a consequence, you know, that wasn't really a big factor for us. So, no, so you would, this is literally, you would literally kick at this object with your shoe in a very flat arc, and you would see if you got something to move. If you know, if it was a piece, if it was a piece of a tin can that somebody had thrown there, it would pop up, and you, okay, that's what it is, and then you would throw it out, and you would check the area again. You know. Now, if you determined that it was something suspicious, you know, then you would get the people out of the way, and then you would have to get yourself an object that you could start investigating, you know, and then you would try to open it up on the side. You try to leave the top alone, but to open it up around the side. And a lot of those mines had some sort of carrying loop or piece of rope or whatever it was on it for the sake of carrying it. And then you would just simply hook a grapple to that, go back to, you know, as far or whatever the length of your line was to where there was a vehicle there, you could get some protection, and then you would pull it with a grapple, you know. And if it didn't explode when you pulled it with the grapple, you would wait a while, and then you would go up and you would unscrew the detonators, you know. And then usually you would have a little box of sand, and you would put the detonators in the box of sand. And it didn't detonate the main charge, you know.
Were you ever destroying this mine in situ, where you would put some explosive charge on it and just blow it? Or will you always try to cover it?
To be honest with you, I mean, you know, I didn't have much experience with the mines because they laid their one special undetectable mine and we found it. And then they were pissed at us and they left us alone. But yes, I guess if you were out somewhere, you know, where it was not a road, you know, if you were just like, you know, when we were going into Angola, these were little Bundu Bash tracks, you know. And in a place like that, you could consider just simply detonating the thing, you know? I mean, of course, you have to be cognizant of the size of the crater that's created and how you're going to fill the crater afterwards if a lot of vehicles still have to pass, you know? And of course, if it, you know, in the city, the bad situations are when you have one of the local population people in one of their trucks and they detonate a metal mine, you know, then it creates a lot of chaos and you have to actually get in there with a shovel and try to dig all the metal out so that the road is going to be clean and you're not constantly going to be finding false signals, you know? So the idea was, you know, if you were on a road, you did whatever you needed to do to make it expeditious the next time you got there. You didn't want to be battling with a lot of false signals and the possibility that they would use that spot to lay a mine because there would be a lot of distractions, you know? I mean, if you take Oshakati, so this is another thing. So, you know, around Oshakati, there's a lot of tar roads. But SWAPO would still lay mines on the tar roads. They would just dig in from the side, similar to what the Iraqis and whatever do, you know? And of course, the people are typically not sweeping the road, they're spooking. And so they're looking for the signs of any disturbance or whatever on the side of the road, you know? And there again, if you had a mine, of course, you wouldn't want to detonate the mine in the tar road. It'd be a hell of a pain to fix it, you know? But then again, you've got to be careful because they know that you're going to want to remove that thing. And so very likely it's going to be booby-trapped, you know? If they've gone to all that trouble, you know, at that point.
Yes, it was a thoroughly dirty war. I mean, it was a war. People think it was just a little shooting here and there, but no, it was an actual shooting war. May I ask you, Keith, I know you were not totally involved in this, but your MOV program, can you just tell us a little bit what they were doing? Because I know the Rhodesians, clever people were Rhodesians. I like them. They had something called a spooky, or spooky, if you say it in English, which was basically, if I understand the concept correctly, was like a old Beetle chassis, the old Beetle cars, where they put enormously big Formula F1 tires on it. These broad tires. And the reason for that is it could float over the landmine. It wouldn't set it off. Then they had like an armored booth inside, looked like a telephone walkie. And then they had these wings, which I believe were finding these mines, not so much on metal detecting, but the hole in the ground. There was a difference in density, I suppose, where the mine is and where the ground, you know, is normal. They were using that in the 1970s. But the South Africans, as far as I know, were using you guys walking. And then came the motor vehicle, the mine opsporing voertuig program. Can you tell us about that, what you know about it?
Well, so my understanding is that the MOVs were using ground penetrating radar. And that is still used today by pretty much everybody in the UN and so on. So now what they were doing with the system is the vehicle did nothing to process the mine. They had a system at the back of the vehicle, and this system would mark the lane in which the object was and its location. And then the people who came behind, of course, would then deal with you know, the object. Now, I think the difference between what the Rhodesians did and the MOVs, the MOV was a much heavier vehicle. It had special tires where the outside part of the tire was actually a kind of foam. And so the MOV was able to drive over anti-tank mine without setting it off. But of course, it would set off an anti-personnel mine, you know, if one had been there. The other big thing was that the front and rear sections had these pin linkages. And it was specially designed to be robust enough to be driven around, but in a blast, it would shear these pins and do relatively minimal damage, you know, to the assembly. And then they would carry spare assemblies with them so that they could just swap it out, you know, if they, for example, if they linked anti-personnel mine to a bigger charge or whatever the case is, But I mean, it still was dependent on the enemy not being too sophisticated. If the enemy put a big shape charge in the middle of the road where the cab was, and an appropriate distance from that, something that was linked with detonator cord. Obviously the MOV was designed higher away from the ground with better kind of armor. It came right at the end of the whole Denel armored vehicle development, so they'd learned a lot of lessons. But even so, you can bring it to the point where you can kill the guy who is in the vehicle, even if the vehicle to a certain extent survives.
Yeah, no, you're quite right. Thank you for that. Opcos. Let us explain to people, what did you mean when you used the word
yes,
opcos?
Opcos was simply an observation post. And of course, the reason why you needed an observation post was to direct fire, right? So Elundu didn't have that much firepower. I think during the days of 3-2 Battalion, if you go back to 1978, when Sapper van der Mesh, after he had been captured there and drug off into Angola, and a whole bunch of his team killed in the tent and bayoneted to death and what have you, back then they added a lot of firepower to Elundu. But then as time passed, and they moved on with 32 Battalion, it became whoever was at the base responsibility to provide the arms, and that was typically just a 7.62 by 51, So our most powerful weapons was the 60 millimeter and the 81 millimeter mortars, but you had to have somebody to tell them where to shoot, and so it was usually a guy from the mortarist team who was sitting up in the observation tower that we had only just recently been built. When you arrive there, these things look as if they've been there for eternity, but of course it's not true. I've seen photographs only a couple of years older, and that observation post was not there. The observation post used to be just a slight elevation on top of the main Armco command bunker. And there used to be some little platform that was up in one of the trees, That's what used to constitute the observation post. But of course, truthfully, the people who were up in those positions were extremely exposed, the enemy could fire at them directly, And that was in the first attack. The guy in the observation post was one of the guys who was killed, and it wasn't clear who shot him. It wasn't clear if the enemy shot him or if somebody from inside the base shot up in the air and hit him,
I want to say here that we're talking to Sapper van der Mesh, and there is a chance that he will come on Legacy, and we'll be most grateful if he does. I think he's got a wonderful story to tell us. Looking back now,
it's a fascinating story because he, I don't know if you realize this, but the SWAPO team that came to do the operation had a group of Swedish reporters embedded in them. I don't know if you knew that. So there were Swedish reporters who were actually present when they did the attack, and they also went all the way back up into Angola, and they were the ones who took the pictures that you see of him in captivity. Was the Swedish reporters, white people, So I don't know. I think they were intending to make a movie about it, but I think that the execution of the actual kidnap scene was so brutal that maybe they changed their minds, because the one other guy who survived, who they were going to take with them, refused to go, and they ended up bayoneting him, I believe, more than 100 times. So I think that maybe after they seen that, they decided not to do a movie about it, But that was the original plan.
there's no doubt that the SWAPO forces were good soldiers. Everybody I speak to here tells me that. that they were fighting all the way. They were not going to surrender just like that. Totally different from the MK and Opla forces later. But we have to also say they were fighting a different war. It was a totally different scenario inside South Africa than outside in Angola. And we will speak to them as well. We have a few lined up. Hopefully they will come to the party, including Sapper. And I want to say everyone is welcome here. I didn't know about the Swedish being present. Well, I'm not surprised. If you look at the voorraden and things which got captured, most of those things came from Sweden, other places. I know that ABBA, for instance, was extremely unpopular where I was. You would not play an ABBA tape. There were no CDs and things then. You would not play an ABBA tape, and I know one guy did, and they actually kicked his radio to pieces. He was quite upset about it. So these things happen. But looking back now, Keith, would you say the war was popular or unpopular amongst your generation of troopies?
Popular or unpopular? I'm not sure. I don't know. It's, I mean, the point is just that it was not easy to get out of doing your duty. I can tell you that where I lived in Port Elizabeth, directly in my neighborhood, about 3 houses away, there was a family, and the 2 sons decided that they were not going to go to the SADF, and they actually went to Switzerland. And in Switzerland, one of them was killed in an avalanche, So, yeah, well, apparently, depending on how you behave yourself, life is not necessarily safer, one way or the other way. But I do think that their father was a bit bitter about it, that they had skipped out, gone to Switzerland. Switzerland is a little bit of a strange type of deal. In general, as South Africans, we are not really welcome in most places, and it can be quite a job to get a visa to go somewhere, and you have to bring a lot of evidence, that you have means to take care of yourself and everything. But, I was able to travel to Switzerland without even having a visa. All you had to do is get through the interview and you landed, And then so, my first wife was from the Weil am Rhein area, which is directly across the river from Basel. And I guess there's a place called Lörrach. But anyway, it's right on the border to Switzerland at that point. And so for many years, when I would go to Germany to visit her family or whatever the case is, we would always fly Swiss Air, land in Zurich, get the little hop flight to Basel, and then we would get picked up over there, and I loved flying Swiss Air, I mean, it's a very scenic country. Of course, I haven't been there for many years, and everything changes, That's one of the things about life. I remember when was it? Would have been the 90s when I went there. It used to be remarkably affordable to eat lunch in the restaurant at the top of one of those mountains. It would take you 3 cable cars to get up there. And then you would pay $20 to have a meal. Now I've heard from other people in the meantime that it's much more expensive now. So, I don't know how things have changed, So, I mean, I believe that this Klaus Schwab, I believe he's a Swiss guy, and he's got his office over there somewhere. He's one of the worst people in the world, Always thinks he knows better how you should live than what you know yourself, right? So, yeah, no, it's... we just have different experiences, and the times change. I had a brother-in-law who lived in Lörrach, which is also just on the German side, and he used to drive every day to Zurich, and he worked for ABB. So he's worked pretty much his entire life for ABB in different sections, you know.
Yeah, they do that. I lived in Switzerland, of course, and my feelings about Switzerland is very well known on legacy. I hate the place and the Swiss. And I will make a video where I'm going to reveal a few things about Swineland. Like, for instance, in 1968, Swiss Air was captured and by the PLO guys, Arafat's people. And with 4 other aircraft, they were landed at the old deserted British base in the desert somewhere in the Middle East, old RAF base. He removed all the passengers and they blew the aircraft up while they were standing alone there on the right. The Swiss then went, and they deny this, but we have all the evidence. One of their ministers actually went and made a deal with Arafat. Basically, it came down to laundering all the terrorist money. And since then, guess what? Swiss Air was never attacked again by these people. And there goes your neutrality. Because the moment that you make a deal with a terrorist group, you're not neutral anymore. And Switzerland is a place where people like to work because they earn good money. But because it's so damn expensive, it doesn't matter. You're still poor. You live like poor whites, most of it. And it's not a country which gives anything back. For instance, your medical, you will pay for your medical assistance. They will even take a tax from you. If you declare yourself to be Protestant, you pay 10% tax. If you're a Roman Catholic, they take 15%. And of course, if you go to Davos, you will find the Schwab fellow with all his mates with New World Order, blah, blah, blah. I wrote books about it. So I know everything about it. But that's for a later thing. We cannot end this with negativity. So I want to know something from you. I recall that in the police, they took this malaria thing quite seriously. In fact, if you got malaria, they would claw you on. They would put you on orders for neglecting your body and therefore the state service and blah, blah, blah. We're in deep trouble. I know that the paratroopers also, I found that out the other day, the episode will still come out, probably out by the time you guys see Lord Pepper, I think, was telling me, if you're not fit enough after you left the paratroopers and you go back for a camp and you not in their levels of fitness, which is of course insane, they will send you to TB and make you fit. They will do something to you. Now, so what would happen is you would stand on parade with this stupid malaria tablets of them, which make you yellow, by the way, tint your color, your skin color. That's what we believe. Maybe it's true, I don't know. But you would stand there and then you would give you this pill, which is extremely bitter. This thing is like dreadful. And then they actually watch you because, you know, most people would just actually make you they swallow it, but they don't swallow it. They just drop it there in your hand or something. So you would actually open your mouth, put it in, close your mouth. Then they give you a bit of water and you can swallow, and so you went up. And they actually checked you afterwards as well. They took this very, very seriously. But what the bastard would do on the other side is he would not give you the water, he'd give the water to your mate next to you. You know, so you're standing with this horrible thing in your mouth, it's really bitter. And so you would swallow like that and get him back the next day, of course, wherever you can. The same story with you guys in practice or not?
Well, there was a little bit of an initiation ceremony at 25 Field when you showed up. And they would actually give you 2 tablets, and then you would have to chew them. You would have to chew them. And they would they would come by and make sure that you have chewed them. And this was for quite a process. I mean, this is like, we're talking 15 minutes or something, you know? And then finally, they would give you some orange juice. But, you know, I mean, you know how strong the army orange juice is, right? I mean, you couldn't even taste that orange juice by the time you got to it, you know? It was as if you were drinking milk or something, you know? So, yes, that was an initiation ceremony that happened when you arrived at 25 Field. But I can assure you, there were definitely a lot of people for whom it was important to have a 10, and the malaria did not allow you to have a 10. And so, it definitely really was true that there were a lot of people who would not, especially before you were going to go on leave, would not take the malaria tablets. And then, the parasite has a certain time that it has to be in your body. I forget what they call it, gestation period or whatever it is. And this generally resulted in the people not getting sick until they got home. And then they would get home and they would be sick with malaria and they would be in the hospital. So, yeah, I know people personally who, and then, of course, the problem is it comes back every year, Every year you have a relapse. Not necessarily as bad as the first time, but I still think it's very unpleasant. So, yeah, it was a tough deal, I mean, it was just one more hazard, associated with being there was the fact that you had this malaria parasite in your bloodstream basically all the time,
Yeah,
and
it's a
then
horrible
just in
thing.
general,
I mean, if you get very ill, you can die. A lot of people die. Hundreds of thousands die every year of malaria.
I mean, more people died from the malaria than from the enemy action. And I mean, to me, that's remarkable when, our unit had a 10% fatality rate to begin with, I mean, it was much higher than the regular units, So, and then notwithstanding that, still more people died from malaria. So, I don't know, and this is one of the things that sort of impacts your life afterwards, depending on how you react to it, I mean, I can remember clapping friends of mine who would drive recklessly. And the thing is, you're 18. People expect 18, 19, 20-year-olds to drive recklessly. But boy, don't try and drive recklessly when I'm in the car, because you're going to get done it, And this was just one of those things that, you didn't really fit in. You didn't behave like the people who hadn't been put through these things. You worked so hard to survive and to come out the other side. And then people, want to have a dop and then go and drive and, see how fast they can go around the corner, I mean, no.
Do you think it's possible, Keith, to remove the army out of you? Is it possible to forget everything and become a civilian and just, be what you were before the army grabbed you?
I don't know. Look, I think it's entirely dependent on your personality. I think there were a lot of people. I mean, if I just take my own section as an example, there's at least half the people don't want to talk about it. They don't want you to bring it up at all. So they have pushed that so far back in their mind, that I think that in the case of some of those people, what you suggest might be possible. There are a lot of these people who would not carry a weapon today, even for their own protection, So, I don't know. I have quite strong feelings about some of this stuff, but at the end of the day, I mean, when you remember the terrorist attack on that church in Cape Town, I forget what the name of the church was, but the St. James Massacre, right? And there was one guy carrying a little snub-nosed revolver who completely changed what the outcome of that thing was going to be. I mean, they threw hand grenades into the congregation. They shot with the stolen SADF rifles, right? That's what it was. They had R4s that were stolen from the SADF. But when the one guy shot back and hit one of the terrorists, they ran. So, he wrote a book, Your Right and Duty to Self-Defense. And, I mean, I really, I believe in that philosophy,
I actually quite agree with you.
Maybe the only way I differ from him is that, I don't necessarily feel that I need to forgive the attacker, that was not a military target,
No, it was a church. They were attacking them after the war stopped.
I mean,
When this
in fact,
happened,
there were a bunch of Russian seamen who were killed in that
yes,
very same attack. So,
that's
I
really
mean,
good. It's in Cape
it
Town,
was
I
just
believe.
completely arbitrary. It's the same as a school shooting, I challenge with these people to come up with a reason for a school shooting, I mean, it's bullshit.
Fully agree with you. I actually wrote a book about that terrorist takedown because I was speaking to a few people, and my late wife was an American citizen. And we were speaking about these attacks taking place at nightclubs and schools and everywhere. And my theory was if there was a good man with a firearm shooting back, surely you'd be able to prevent more loss of life, because it seems to me that the sheriff departments will sit outside, as they did numerous times. It's in my book. Not go in with their SWAT teams as they bloody well supposed to do. Wait until this guy has finished shooting, then they go in. You know what? That's not acceptable. End of story. If
Well,
a civilian
the
can pick up
Texas
a firearm
example
and shoot
was,
back, it's a good thing.
yeah. No, it's I don't know. At the end of the day, it's my personal belief that the federal law that prohibits the carrying of weapons into school property was designed to make them targets. When all of the nutcases know that all they have to do is go to the nearest school or to the nearest corporate workplace, which is the same, no guns allowed. They know they can go to any of these people and there's lots of victims to shoot. And they have a very high confidence that nobody's going to shoot back. And the only thing that is left to the public is civil disobedience, to carry anyway, regardless of the sign that says you shouldn't carry. That's all it comes to.
Yeah, you do feel a bit let down by the government or the officials when this type of thing happens, because it is, as you say, it's like disarming the civilian population, and then what happens? Only the bad guys now carry. What the hell must you do? Attack them with a kitty or something? I mean, especially if you cannot trust your police to actually, uh, you know, take them down before they can do any damage. How many times were it reported? I wrote books about this as well. How many times were they reported before they commit an act of terror? And I come from the world of counterterrorism. And most of these people, you see them change. Their family will tell you, oh, we never knew this guy would do this. No, of course not. They're lying. Because suddenly you see this guy change completely, become a religious nut, whether left or right, whether Muslim or Christian, I don't care. Still the same thing at the end of the day. They start killing. That's what bothers us. And you can see it in this guy's life. He actually starts changing. And it's a gradual process. And then he suddenly goes for training here. And suddenly he goes to places where he actually shouldn't be, like in the Middle East. And he disappears for a few months. Then he comes back, and suddenly you have this terrorist attack, and everybody says, ooh, I'm so surprised. There's nothing surprising about it. And every time that these people were actually reported to the FBI or the Clinton Investigation Bureau or something, which I called it at one stage, you guess what? They just flipping ignore it. And then somebody actually did his PhD on this. More than 70% of the terrorist attacks inside America is done almost with FBI approval, in the sense that they had people right inside who were making these suggestions. And then he gets to entrapment. This is actually facts. I'm not lying.
I live in Michigan, right? And you've probably heard about this kidnapping attempt on the governor, right? I mean, there were more FBI people involved in the operation than outsiders. The FBI paid for and organized all of the training camps and all this stuff, right? The FBI acquired all of the illegal stuff, right? The FBI is always the one that's going to provide the bomb-making material. No, I think that, look, just in general, has kind of come out since Trump was in his office the first time, the partisan nature of both the FBI and the CIA and the degree of cooperation with the Democrat candidates. You know, I don't know who has any kind of idea that these are non-partisan agencies anymore, you know, yet they are executive agencies basically reporting to the president, right? So, yeah, I don't know. It's, you know, I mean, what we are seeing in America is the slipping of the rule of law. You know, there are rules forced for one group of people, but not for another group of people. You know, we had Antifa burning the cities down for months. Virtually nobody prosecuted. Nobody. People were killed. Lots of people were killed. Nobody prosecuted. Then you have what amounts to the occupation of Congress, okay? Which happened under other circumstances too, you know? Maybe just not the same way, not by climbing in through the windows and everything. But you have the occupation of Congress. Nobody from Congress was assaulted, killed, shot, set on fire, you know? Yet they're prosecuting these guys for years now, right? So there's a clear bias. You know, one group of people can do something and everybody looks the other way. Everybody lets them go. Immediately afterwards, you had the Kyle Rittenhouse thing, right? The Kyle Rittenhouse thing. Everybody he shot was already a known felon. These people were in possession of firearms that they were not allowed to have. They were not prosecuted for being a felon in possession of the weapon, right? No, they're going to prosecute the guy who is just trying to protect himself, right? That's the guy who needs to be prosecuted by the state, the full force of the state brought against him. You know, I mean, you think that Wisconsin is a Midwest state, would have, you know, conservative values, whatever. No. We're talking about Madison, Wisconsin. It's a right. That is how it is. All the cities, almost without exception, all the cities are run by Democrats. All the mayors are Democrats. Guys in the, you know, the guy who's the police superintendent is appointed by a Democrat mayor, you know. So no, it's the law has become very much one-sided. You see during the this whole COVID pandemic, all of the suppression of information, you know, the threats made against doctors' licenses suspended because they prescribed medicines that they thought were appropriate, right? I mean, we've seen some remarkable stuff in this country, you know. I mean, you know, I found myself in a situation where, you know, I was one of the people who was going to be vulnerable to COVID, but it looks like if you take the vaccine, there's a good chance the vaccine is going to kill you, right? But you can take something other than the vaccine that is very much likely to be safer, right? I can find a doctor to prescribe me some ivermectin, but then the pharmacist will refuse to issue it, right? That's the situation we had in Michigan, right? The pharmacist would refuse to issue you the medicine, even if they had it, and even if you had a doctor's note who had prescribed it, right? So, you know, unbelievable. I mean, you used to be able to buy the ivermectin, the so-called horse paste. You could buy it at the local farm store, right? What did they do? They went in there, took it off the shelf and put it inside a safe. And then you had to go through a whole process to get access to this drug that people had been using for decades, right? And I mean, ultimately, I bought some of the horse paste on Amazon and I treated myself with it when I got the Delta version, right? I'm pretty sure that if I didn't treat myself, I would have died. But within 24 hours of taking the ivermectin, you know, my fever was gone. And the virus never made it into my lungs and never made it out far enough, you know? So no, we've all been through a lot in recent times. You know, then you have the federal government paying the hospital a donation of $15,000 if I'm declared deceased due to COVID, right? What kind of incentive is it when you attach a price tag to everybody who comes into the hospital? Okay, if we can get this guy to die, okay, by putting him on a vent and you know, sedating him basically, so that you can't talk, speak, interact, do anything, right? You're basically unconscious. You're on such an amount of drugs that it's likely to kill you if it goes on for long enough anyway. And then you on a vent lying on your back, right? You're going to drown basically in your own body fluid, you know? Unbelievable. And yet nobody is being prosecuted for any of this stuff if they follow the Fauci protocol. I mean, yeah, I mean, we did have a lot of people who died, and a lot of the people who died probably didn't need to die, you know? If I can survive COVID without any medical intervention, without going to see a doctor, without getting prescribed any treatment, merely on the basis of taking some horse paste that I bought for $20, you know, I survived. And I mean, you know, I survived with really, you know, other than having some digestive issues, you know, I didn't have lung scarring or any of this terrible stuff that they said, you know, would be the case, right? And of course, in the meantime, how many people have died from heart attacks and strokes and whatever is suddenly, unexpectedly, right? All these people who thought that they were safe getting vaccinated. How many people have had their teenage children die, you know, at age 14, 15, right? I mean, it's crazy. So, yeah, I think it's been quite amazing. But, you know, I guess overall, when you look at how compliant the general public are, that, you know, countries like Israel, for example, especially in Israel, where people are trained, they've been in the military, you know, they've been fighting for, yet they comply and get those vaccinations, you know, to like 90-something% of the population. It's unbelievable. You know, that the president believes that he's got the power to force 90 million people out of employment because they've refused to take the vaccine, where the entire military is purged of all of the people, including the pilots and everybody who refuse to take the vaccine, right? So you're preparing the military. You've eliminated basically anybody who's going to think for themselves, right? The people who are left are people who are just blindly going to adhere to whatever the policy is, even if it kills them. I mean, those are some pretty dangerous times, you know, when the military ultimately is supposed to be responsible for ensuring that the Constitution is upheld, right?
It's quite true. I mean, we went through times which I didn't believe will ever happen. But I was warning about that. I said to people from the 1990s, the premier Western intelligence agency started changing. They became left-wing liberal. Now, we think of them in the old days as conservative people, church-going people, people who were anti-communist. But when the Cold War stopped, and this is only my theory, it's in my books as well, but it's my theory and I saw it happening. It seems to me the good guys left. They became bored, they left, mediocrity came in. But with the years, they got promoted.
I think you said it though, but you know, when you put enough money in something, at the end of the day, everybody has a price. And within these last 2 years, the amount of money that has flowed is just unbelievable. And so, you know, I think that they have bought the politicians lock, stock, and barrel. There's just only a handful of people who are trustworthy.
There's no doubt about it. And I mean, I must tell you, you live in the US now. We will look in from the outside, can tell you, I think most of us are fairly disgusted with the US right now. But it's not the average citizen. I want to tell this to you people. It's not the average guy on the street. This is Washington and the swamp. And of course, we're on dangerous roads out here now because we know how YouTube reacts whenever we say something which we were saying. But I don't care because I can tell you now, I think my own mother died the year before because we're in January now on the 31st of December 2021. The year before the one which is just passed. She had both of her vaccines. Then they put her into a COVID ward in East London. And a few days later, she was cremated. She never woke up. We spoke to people on this very show. I think it was General Jock Harris, the 3 Battalion commander, who made an offhand comment to me. He said, "Chris, I was very ill." And then I took this ivermectin. You say it so nicely. I can never say the word properly. He took that. General Jock is writing his book now, and he spoke to us as well. It saved lives. My question is to people who want to argue with us, and you're welcome to come and argue with us. I understand most doctors were also vaccinated. Tell me what happens when these people get ill. It seems to me like an entire army was being destroyed. And then people call me, "Oh, you're a conspiracy theorist." Well, you know what? Perhaps you should look at more than just Fox News and CNN and things like that. Do some research, guys. Don't just take face value what the press is telling you, because all of them are liars. You cannot accept the word. You have to investigate and use the brain, which I suppose God give you, to give yourself a brain. But you guys, just to get back to your story, I understand you're still in contact with your group, with your section. Would you say there's a bond between you guys which is very strong?
Yeah, look, I would, in particular, Dean Collett and myself, we went to high school together, and we were then sappers together, and we ended up at Elundu together. And Dean was basically the leader of the one sweeping team. I was the leader of the other. And we were in a lot of tight spots, and we knew that we could rely on each other. I mean, I haven't gone into too much detail, because we probably don't want to have controversies about the Cape Corps. But I can tell you that I got death threats almost weekly, because I refused to spook the road up there. I mean, can you imagine spooking the road to Nkongo, which is 42 kilometers to the halfway mark, being in a vehicle that detonates a mine, that at whatever, 20, 30 kilometers an hour, I mean, you could kill several people on that vehicle, if not everybody, And, I mean, the people are observing you. If you do this kind of thing, they are going to set a trap for you. So, no, I really had a lot of death threats for making other people do their job, because they didn't want to do it, And, we basically told the other people in the base that anybody who comes into our area at night, unannounced, we're going to shoot them, Because why? Why do you need to do that? We know what happened to Fanamesh, of course. There were other people in the base who were not taken away, but were simply killed, had their throat cut. So, I don't know. I would say that I was under quite a lot of psychological stress, at that time in my life when I was quite young. And I mean, it's mainly had an impact on my sleep. That's been the biggest problem that I've had. I got to a point where I had these reoccurring nightmares. And then there was sort of a break where basically I had no recollection of any dreams anymore. And that has persisted with me now for the next, whatever, nearly 40 years, So I think I got off fairly light, if that's all I had, as a scar from that experience. But yes, but, I think some people also, they just, after they were done, they just wanted to suppress the memories of what they had seen, what they had been involved with. They didn't want to think about it, and I don't know. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, we were all left to just cope with the situation however we thought it was best, you know. I will say that, you know, I have been in contact with a guy by the name of Barry Fowler. Now, Barry Fowler was a PF psychologist, worked at One Mill, you know, and he was sent up to visit Elundu. In fact, he was the last outside person who showed up in Elundu before the base was abandoned. You know, but what he didn't realize is, you know, what our workload was. We did not have time to talk to this guy. I mean, the day that he showed up with a convoy, we were loading trucks with the big cement blocks from the helipad. We had literally packed the cement blocks from the helipad up on a truck, and Dean Collett actually got his finger squished between two of them, and the doctor sewed his finger back together, and Barry was standing there holding the flashlight, okay? But I think that the little visit that Barry had to that base had quite a big impact on him, and he has put quite a lot of effort into trying to contact people who had been there, you know, at Elundu. So Barry has also, he has a website called Sentinel SADF. You'll find it with Google, and he has an interview with myself and with Dean and other people. He's interviewed also many hundreds of people, but he's published it just simply on the internet on a website as opposed to in a video format.
Well, he's welcome here. He's welcome here, all those people. And also the Cape Collett Corps, I am looking for some of them. We did interview a few of their commanders before. They're welcome to come and tell their story. I just want to ask you, this friction between the Sappers and the Cape Collett Corps, this was not based upon racism at all, was it? I mean, you're not a racist man.
No, actually, to be honest with you, you know, you first of all, when you go into a situation, so it was an unusual situation that at that time in '87, you had the Cape Corps in complete command of a base like that. And of course, you know, you also have to go back on what exposure have you had to these people previously. And in general, when you look at the behavior of the Cape Corps, they are known for their excellence with drill and all of this kind of thing, right? I mean, they're better than just about anybody else. And so your overall impression is that they are a very parat group, right? And that is the impression that is maintained when you first show up there, right? But then you start to have to do things operationally with these guys. You know, I mean, we had to go out and sweep that road almost every day. And then you come under pressure from both the officers group and the non-commissioned officers group not to sweep the road, that you should spook the road. Why? You know, this is not the place to be doing those things. We are not by Oshakati on asphalted roads within VHF distance of Ondangwa where they can send a helicopter, you know. I mean, in many cases, the only way you'd get word out was to get somebody in a vehicle to drive back until they get back in radio range. So, you know, and then, of course, it took some time to emerge because, you know, we were active virtually every day. Every day we would go out and sweep. By the time you come back, it's usually nightfall. So we did not really know what is going on at the base, okay? And when you would get back, I mean, after you do your evening class time parade, you go to sleep and you're gone because you're exhausted, okay? But then we started noticing on the parade ground, every morning there would be fresh bandages. People got bandaged, they'd be stabbing each other, be fighting at night. You know, now, unfortunately, you know, I don't have the contact information for the doctor, but I am in contact with Dean Blacklaw's. It would be nice to speak to somebody from the medical group who could actually tell you something about what was going on here, you know? How frequent were these things How many stitches were they having to put in on a regular basis, you know? But, you know, I mean, I'm not joking. Every week you would see fresh bandages on the parade ground from where they've been stabbing and cutting each other. And, of course, you know, when they had the attacks on the base, it was a complete disaster because it was always late at night. You had about 90% of the people who were drunk. And, you know, you couldn't get any kind of order out of these guys at that stage. It didn't matter what you did. We had to basically try to ignore them and just go about our duty, find all of the dobbits, put sandbags over them, find the wounded, carry them into the sick bay with a stretcher. And I mean, you know, we bear in mind that first time around, you know, we had one section of people had to carry the majority of the wounded, over 200, into the sick bay. We had to, you know, go out and do rondom verdediging for the helicopter that was coming in to do the cassavac. We had to, you know, move fuel in 55-gallon drums so that they could refuel the Puma on the way back, you know? No, I don't know. It was, it didn't take long. And bear in mind that the first attack on the base was in March. So, you know, I showed up there towards the end of January, right? So, I mean, and it wasn't late March. It was fairly early. And so we only had about a month and a little bit of peace, and then all hell broke loose, you know? So, you know, I mean, and then after that, you just have to respond in whatever you know, you have to solve the problem, right? If the problem is protection, you have to get bigger, better weapons, whatever, for yourself, you know? And other than that, you have to keep a strong line, and you have to force these people to do their job, you know? Doesn't matter how many death threats they're going to give you. Doesn't matter how many times they tell you that they're going to cut your throat from ear to ear, blah, 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 you know? You know, they used to, when we used to go through to Inanna, there were cases where they had done something bad. Like, for example, they would make the sappers do guard duty the night before you're going to go and sweep. Now, that's against the operational procedure. You're not allowed to do guard duty and then the next morning go and sweep the road, right? Bearing in mind, of course, you've got to look at the relationship, right? We've got 8 guys over here, and we've got 350 infantry. There's plenty infantry people to stand guard. There's only 8 sappers to sweep the road, you know? And there was one situation where I told them, you know, that if they made us stand guard, we couldn't refuse to stand guard, but we would refuse the next day to sweep. And we went through with it. We refused to sweep. Of course, it created a hell of a dilemma because the convoy had to go, right? I mean, the commandant was not going to understand when the convoy doesn't show up to pick up their stuff, you know? And so, of course, what did they do? They put me in the front vehicle and they swerved, right? And then the last 2 kilometers were walking through the town of Inanna. Then they had a couple of guys carrying detectors, right? Who didn't know what they were doing. And then, of course, they basically had me kidnapped in a vehicle outside of town, wouldn't allow me to go into town so I could speak to my officer and make a report. So these were the kind of things that that happened. But at the end of the day, you know, you can't fold, right? You just have to. After that time, they knew they couldn't pull a stunt like this again, you know. But yeah, it was a tough situation, you know. I mean, it was especially a tough situation for me as a lance corporal to have to face down these full lieutenants and the staff sergeant and all the other people that they had on their side, you know. So yeah, I don't know.
There was a total breakdown in command at that place at that time. I mean, it is a pity because it wasn't like that everywhere. I hope not.
No.
But perhaps people can come and tell us your stories. Is there anything you wish to say to your comrades? Looking back, if somebody's watching you now, any message you have for them?
I don't know. I have, of course, I have tried to, you know, convince my colleagues to leave South Africa. I guess if you're not going to leave South Africa, you know, you should seriously consider, you know, moving to a place where there is some geographical safety, and where you can build a community that can support itself. And I'm talking, of course, about the Northern Cape, you know. But it's just amazing how so many people just seem to be too comfortable with the lives that they have, and they don't seem to realize how quickly their lives can change. Like, for example, if Eskom was to fail, you know, I mean, you would have complete pandemonium within a few days. If the power was out for 2 weeks, I don't think that the high tension lines would be there to conduct the power if it came back on again, you know, with the theft of copper and aluminium and everything being what it is, you know. Yeah, that's honestly, I've tried to be of assistance to some people by providing them with communication, HF communication equipment, and so on. You know, to help some of the Satan Verdediging command structures. But other than that, there's not really a lot that I can do anymore. So, you know, definitely my life has not been comfortable. You know, you got to consider that, you know, when I left South Africa in 2000, I was 32. At that point, I had no work prospects anymore, no promotional opportunities. You know, I had a house that I was within 18 months of paying off, you know. I could have been maybe more comfortable financially. I wouldn't have had a mortgage payment or whatever the case is. And, you know, in general, I would say that the downfall of society has taken longer, maybe, than what a lot of people predicted. But unfortunately, the trend is only one way, you know. You know, it might level off a little bit, but then later it's going to go down again. We haven't seen any build-up, you know, anything getting put back together, made to work again, you know. You know, just overall, I think that South Africans as a group, they don't realize the impact of inflation that they've had in South Africa. You know, I'm working now still for the same company that I worked for when I was in South Africa. It's the same company. I've worked for them in South Africa, I worked for them in Germany, and I've worked for them now in the United States for 24 years, okay? You know, the South African employees are more expensive than the German ones. I mean, how is that supposed to encourage anybody to want to invest money and maintain an operation in a place that is logistically so difficult to support, so dangerous for travel? You know, I mean, you know, but people's wages seem to be rising, you know, to counteract the inflation within the country. But, you know, how's this sustainable long term? You know, if you, generally speaking, if somebody can get a service done cheaper somewhere else, they're going to go there and use it, you know. So yeah, it's becoming a bit dangerous, I think. You know, if I look at my own family, you know, my younger sister was the first one to leave the country, and then she was followed by the next oldest sister, and then I moved to Germany. In the meantime, my parents have moved to be together with the daughters and the grandchildren in New Zealand. So, you know, I only have one member of my direct family left in South Africa, and that's my brother. And he's in Cape Town. And he worked the longest time for Old Mutual. And they tried their best to protect him, you know, to prevent him from being eliminated. But eventually they got around to him and they eliminated him anyway. So, you know, he's probably, so I mean, I'm 54, he's 56. He's probably not going to work in the regular working sector again in his life. You know, and, you know, if you weren't facing the inflation problems that you are facing, then, you know, maybe you could survive based on your investments and so on. But in the face of the kind of inflation, I can't see how that is supposed to work, you know. And then, of course, when you look at the ordinary South Africans, the fortunate than I am, than my brother is, who don't have the sort of education or the expertise or whatever it is, I mean, we know what's happening with those people, right? I mean, there's many, many white people in squatter camps again, just like my father was, right? My father grew up in a squatter camp. I mean, to me, it's a bit of kind of amazing story. You think that my father grew up in a squatter camp and started working at the age of 13 to support the family. Most of his children, other than my brother, have all left the country, have all established careers in other countries outside of South Africa in one generation, And the people who stay behind are going to be almost exactly back to the position that my father was in, except that this time they weren't disowned by the British, This time it's their own government doing it to them, Making them impoverished, making it impossible to be employed, etc., etc., And that was I believe, one of the major causes of death with Kewen. Kewen, when we were on the border, he already knew he was going to start an excavation business, and he did that. And he employed people. He had multiple types of vehicles and trucks and whatever the case is. And ultimately, because of BEE, he wasn't able to bid on any municipal, state, or any kind of business like that. He could only work here and there for private people, spending their own money, And of course, eventually, he didn't have enough revenue to support the operation. He had to lay people off. He had to sell his equipment off, And this is the deal. These are hardworking people who, running an excavation business is not like working on Wall Street or something. You know what I mean? It's you down there, and it's all diesel and fuel and smoke, and these are not glamorous jobs. But you can't. You're not even allowed to have a job like that. So I personally believe that he became depressed, and he ultimately had his first stroke, and then about a year later, he's now died,
Yeah, he was part of your section.
Yeah.
It's a sad story what is happening in South Africa now, and it's even more sad that most of the world don't care. But I can tell you that at Legacy we do care. And I want to invite all of you people here. Come and talk to us, please. Don't. It's very easy to talk to us, actually. You just write an email and we will get back to you. It might not be as quick as with you, Keith. Normally it takes about 6 weeks before we can get to you, but this was a bit exceptional. I'm very grateful that you got to us. We're going to talk to Dean as well at some stage in the future. And I wish to thank all of you who are watching here, listening here. Again, you are welcome here. And if you feel you don't have a story, man, you probably do have a story. We really want to accommodate everybody. It doesn't matter to us if you were a sapper or a parabat or a chef or a storeman. We don't care. We need to get this history down so that people can understand in the years to come what you guys went through and what sacrifices you made. So as always, I say to you at the end of our show, God bless you until we meet again.
Thank you very much, Chris. I appreciate everything that you are doing. And thank your wife for her contribution also.
Thank you. I will do that.